Hey there guys, today we're going to be taking a look at all of the Batman Arkham games running on the Beelink SER5 with the Ryzen 5 5600H. Now this little mini PC I have been having an absolute blast with testing because I've been finding it to actually have some pretty incredible levels of performance in a lot of titles, especially older AAA titles, but you'll see that it actually does really well across the board today. And starting things off with my personal favorite one in the series, we have Batman Arkham Asylum. Now here you have it running at 1080p with its full graphics settings all the way maxed. And the level of performance that we're getting here is pretty rock solid. The game itself has a 60 FPS cap, and we're able to pretty much be at that the entirety of the time with the occasional dip here and there down into the mid 40s. But in general, the performance is really rock solid. Exterior areas will occasionally drop the 1% lows down into the 30s, but overall the experience is really rock solid, as you can tell by the frame time chart there. In general, it is a really nice experience, and you're actually going to have a much better gaming experience than anybody that originally played this game on consoles when it first came out. And I don't know, maybe it's the fanboy in me, but I think that the aesthetic of this game really holds up to this day. Being able to have it in a crystal clear full 1080p resolution is really nice in comparison to what people on the PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 were playing at back then. Now luckily for the rest of the series, they actually started to incorporate built-in benchmarks. And for Batman Arkham City here, you can see the level of performance that we're looking at here, at least according to the benchmark, is getting around a 50 FPS average most of the time, with 1% lows being in the 30s. And this is with the graphics set to their highest. The only thing I never end up turning up is AA. And if I could disable FXAA, I will do it. So this is pretty much all graphics settings set to their highest. It's just no anti-aliasing. And when you're actually in the game, the level of performance that you get is really nice and consistent. You're going to be able to play the game perfectly fine here at the maximum graphics settings at 1080p. You're not looking at a 60 FPS average or anything like that, but the level of performance is still consistent enough that you'll be able to play through this no problem whatsoever. And especially if you pair this with a display that actually has FreeSync, it's the perfect experience. Now moving on to Batman Arkham Origins, you can see here with the built-in benchmark at the highest graphics settings, we are looking at some rock solid levels of performance. A lot of the highest settings are pretty much just labeled as DX11 enhancements, and none of them really seem to tank the performance too much, and overall the benchmark result looked really impressive. Of course, the only thing we leave off is anti-aliasing. Now when you're actually in the game and fighting, the gameplay isn't exactly hitting the 50 FPS range, but it is staying in the mid 40s, and the 1% lows are only slightly under 30, which means that if you're willing to sacrifice some of the visual quality, you're going to be able to boost the overall performance here. But just in general, if you want to have the maximum visual quality out of this game, you can actually do it and get a really rock solid experience. And again, we are at the full 1080p resolution. Now Batman Arkham Knight is where things start to get a little more difficult. If we're talking about the full 1080p resolution with the medium in-game graphics settings, no longer can we go to the absolute highest, but if we go with medium graphics settings and the textures set to their maximum, you'll see that we're at least able to get a consistent 30 FPS average, at least in the built-in benchmark. Within the game itself, you will have more consistent drops in the 1% lows down into the low 20s, sometimes even briefly hitting the teens, but in general it is doable if you want that full resolution and you're not willing to go down all the way to the lowest graphics settings. But if you're willing to actually sacrifice some resolution and go down to 900p, you can see that the level of performance that you get in this game is really nice, and you don't actually have to sacrifice the visual quality in the sense that you have to turn off all the effects and set everything to the absolute lowest graphics settings. In general, the 1% lows look really solid here, and our averages, while not hitting really high numbers, they are at least consistent enough. In the actual game itself, 900p still looks perfectly fine, and it just plays so much better than if we're just teetering on the edge with the full 1080p resolution, that I think that the drop is worth it, especially since we still get a lot of the visual effects. And even though the image isn't as sharp as we'd like it to be, at least the visual effects do give it some depth, so it's not the absolute worst possible experience. experience. In general, I found the game to be extremely playable on here and very, very enjoyable, and I think 900p is just the way to. In general, I keep just being constantly impressed by a system that is not even bigger than the audio interface I actually use with it. If you're interested in picking up your own Beelink SER5, check out the links down below to the two different models of it. I personally really recommend them.